curious about you. So you weren't satisfied.
No, I was not.
You were not satisfied just doing the horticultural. Yeah.
That's right.
The horticultural therapy. And then for some reason you jumped and married psychology. How did this work? Or
Sure. So I will say that I
Sure.
worked at a place called Shelburne Farms. When
In
I
Vermont?
was in Vermont, when I was a junior in college, I moved up there for my finished my bachelor's,
Mhm.
and I worked for 2 years at Shelburne Farms, which was privately owned
Okay.
by the Webb family, and it was a 1,400-acre estate.
Wow.
And it was a biodynamic garden, which basically means all organic and all practicing the very, very best of agriculture and horticulture in order to really retain the sanctity of the planet.
Yes.
And the tradition of people that put Shelburne Farms together are impressive.
Wow.
They're global superstars,
Mhm.
rock stars,
Yeah,
if you will.
yeah.
You know, people like Frederick Law Olmsted did the design, and Gifford Pinchot did the forestry. So it was the Vanderbilt Webb summer home.
Okay.
And it's still there.
Still there.
You can go up there. There's children's programs.
Yes.
There you can stay at the inn, et cetera, et cetera. People, you know, at the time, they occasionally had school field trips.
Okay.
Now they do it 5 days a week.
Yes.
On a
Educating.
Just amazing.
Right.
But at the time, they wanted to transfer it from family owned because they couldn't pay the taxes.
Okay.
And they really more largely wanted to offer this beautiful place as a global resource
to the
for
public.
Environmentalism.
Right.
So don't think that didn't really influence me, because I was working with some mentors.
How did it influence you?
It really brought my consciousness to such an awareness that our planet really, really was in trouble.
Okay.
And that people were not paying attention.
Right.
And that it was education, it was environmental education of all that needed to happen.
Yep.
And
go to the root.
Yeah. And I felt the seriousness of this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking 1977 to 1979. And so I was so honored to work with the Webb family and work with their visions and help as sort of a scribe and a private assistant, if you will. It was sort of like that. Also a student teacher for summer classes from University of Vermont. I just had the honor of doing it all. In fact, even Keith Jarrett would rent out the inn, and he'd come up and do weeks of just musical jamming.
That's
and
amazing.
experimentation. He lived there.
Awesome.
You know, that's just an example of the riches that existed at the time in terms of who was interested in this project.
Right.
And so, and I could talk on and on about just that, because it's still, even to this day, if you look at their website, Shelburne Farms, it is an absolutely amazing place. Visit it.
And we'll have links for the podcast of several different things that you've brought up today.
That's really great.
which will be great. Yes.
So getting back to how that influenced me, I had a vision to work with National Park Service. And so I worked at Independence National Park in Philadelphia for a very long season as a horticulturalist specifically. And that was very, very interesting. The other piece that really was developed because of Shelburne Farm was historic preservation of what I consider to be sacred, special places.
Absolutely.
And so Shelburne Farm, it just, you couldn't work in that place without being thrusted into the whole understanding about.
Okay, I'm gonna go. You've convinced me.
Preserving.
But I have to go with her.
Well, I'll go. Yeah,
I'll
take you on a grand tour.
Sounds amazing.
But it really opens your eyes about, my goodness, we walk around and there's so many special places. Oftentimes these places are torn down and then they create neighborhoods.
With a park, with a nature area and a little tiny park.
Yeah, or this could have been very much, and it probably would have been, a wealthy man's playground.
Yeah,
you know,
that sometimes hosts one wedding.
And nothing against wealth. I have nothing against that.
Sure.
Many of the benefactors are folks, but they would have.
It would have been privatized.
You had a family that had this amazing place, and they had a struggle paying taxes because the taxes began really escalating. And so they generously, the family gave this to the world, and in that preserved it, which is exceptional, and it's unusual.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
all of us are motivated to have financial security.
And our own thing, our own piece of the
That's
beautiful
right.
earth of what they created.
That's right.
Right.
So this amazing family and this amazing land really changed my life. Really did. I've had a couple of changed my life moments. After that, I went down, worked at Shelburne Farm, at Independence National Park.
Okay.
And then got involved in a relationship at a pretty young age, if you will, as I look back now. So someone that I met when I was 19, and had a little bit of a sort of interruption in terms of my career goals and my direction.
You're kidding. Love got you off of your path. How could it happen?
The L word.
Pretty
Absolutely.
sure that's why 5-iron took a break. and we do not regret it. Yeah.
So anyway, that was a whole period of time of
you became a mother.
Of sort of being dormant. And yes, I got married. I became a mother of two children, and went back into floral. Well, actually, I had always done floral design. Okay. So became involved during that period of time in design. But something was always really missing, and I felt like to be honest, abandoned myself in a direction that I was so gracefully bathed in at a young age.
I do understand.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
how do you understand?
Well, we took a break for 9 years, 5-iron.
Yeah.
So I put away my horn, and I put away the rock star life, and I put away.
Wow.
And I was a mom, and I worked at a church, and I loved it. And then when 5-iron got back together, I feel like my, not just my musical muscles, but who I am as a person and as a woman came back. My performer, all of it. That's the true me. The true me is on stage, connecting with God and others.
Yes, it is. I know that about you.
I know. And it's not just so cool. And it's okay. I'm glad to have both. I'm grateful to have both.
Well, I realized that there are so many facets to people's being. Right. There are so many different pieces, and it's not like you can do it all at once.
Nope. Seasons.
And once and for all.
Yep.
That we build on our experiences, and the world spins at the same time. And so we grow, and we actually become deeper and richer. And it's almost, I think of that wonderful time, especially giving birth and having children, as really being so in touch personally and intimately with the earth and with our essence. And I will say that it was a profound time of spiritual growth for me. When my little ones were little, I started studying bodywork.
Oh, okay.
And that was part of it almost felt like I don't want to say this because my kids were really important, but it felt like I had colors of the rainbow when I was in college, that it was almost too much all at once for me, because you've got to digest things.
Yes.
And then it sort of, I knew something was missing. It was like the world went from color to black and white for a little while.
And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Pulled back.
Yeah. And yet the most profound experience twice that I had was after giving birth. I had a very profound experience spiritually, of feeling very much at one and very connected, and very blessed.
Yes.
And
right.
It was a very, and my births were not without problems, physically and medically, which brought me into medicine. That's
really?
Absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. I actually had a little bit of a cancer scare after my second child.
Okay.
I guess it's an interesting piece to add in. I had a really cool physician who was holistically oriented, which was very unusual in the 80s.
Not that it matters, but male or female?
Male.
Okay.
In 1984. And after I gave birth, they diagnosed me as having what looked like to be cancer and needing surgery. And I thought, I'm not going to do that right now. So I went to my doctor, and he said, acupuncture could really help you. And at this time, I had not studied bodywork.
Sure.
And I went to the acupuncturist there, a woman who had actually lived in China. And as a child grown up, she was British, but her father had business, and so they lived there. So she was very adept at acupuncture.
Amazing.
And
So good.
So within 3 sessions, the tumor disappeared.
3 sessions? I've been going for a few months, but I still have some stress.
Yeah.
Just kidding. That is amazing.
But this is it.
She's very talented, and she's very blessed to know what she's doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I do actually think when you give birth and you're very connected to it, it was an honor for me both times.
Yeah.
That you're in a state of grace, ideally. If you're paying somewhat attention,
yeah,
it happens to you. It's like there's a force bigger than us that's a mystery.
Yeah.
But I feel like I was meant to learn that lesson early in my life.
Okay.
And I was so prepared from the grace of it.
Oh wow.
And so that it was a big experience. So that really influenced me. I went back to my OB-GYN. And she couldn't believe that it was gone.
Wow.
She could not believe. She said, I don't know how you do that. I've never heard of acupuncture. But she said, I'm going to start going.
Sure.
Who are you going to?
Right.
She really did. It was pretty revolutionary at the time for her in the 80s. And so that I felt that I felt different.
Okay.
And it just accidentally happened that there was a school that wasn't yet put together 15 minutes away from where I lived.
To do acupuncture or body work?
To do body work. Yeah. And so that, as my children were very little, in 1989, I started exploring it. And I, to this day, still do holistic modalities for myself and allopathic, more traditional medicine if I need it. But that really launched me in, wow, what is this?
Right.
And the very first session that I had with a woman who started the school was so profound that I actually felt like I knew exactly where her hands were going to go next.
Yeah.
It's
the dance.
It felt like I was meant to study this. And she said, you're meant to do this.
Well, when I gave you a massage
at the
festival, and it was interesting because you said my hands were getting warm, and I love giving massages. I really do. The only thing is I don't think I have the stamina and energy to do it as a career, but it is for the giver and the recipient. It's giving to both.
It's a relationship.
Right.
It's a whole field of giving for sure. And actually practicing body work, it alters you into, you're definitely much more sensitive, which is a plus and sometimes a disadvantage, because you really need a certain amount of peace in your life. Yeah. And
so do you become more empathetic?
I think what I want to say is we're all empathetic because I've taught a lot of people. I've given, oh my gosh, thousands and thousands of bodywork sessions. Right. And I've taught hundreds and hundreds of students. I mean,
so you think we're intuitively empathetic, but we just shut it down a bit?
Absolutely innate in each and every one of us. That's why I say I think that we should start teaching children very early, and from that you begin to understand that it's very natural. So a large part of teaching people how to do body work is to teach them it's a shift to your focus because it's already there. Right. Some people are more right brain than left brain, so right brain would be more intuitive and left more sort of analytical. But a lot of people didn't think it could be learned, and then they realized, it can be. Yeah. So question for you. So it's a soulful, it's an emotional, it's a physical world. How did you make the jump from that world into a clinical world where very traditional medicine.
You're not touching people at all? Maybe sometimes you want to, but it'd be inappropriate. Right. How did that leap happen?
So are you making reference to switching into a more psychology based?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really big question. Because as I talk about it, my true love is body work and design. But how I made the switch was pretty much pragmatic in a lot of different ways. I still do body work. Right. I do, but I'm very I don't have an open practice, and I don't, if you can't do both.
Right.
But I came to a point in my own life, my own personal life, that I needed to simplify what I did. And I have to say that the world has really changed. In the 90s, there was so much space to do creative, holistic medicine.
In the 90s,
In the 90s.
It's gotten not as open anymore?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah. And it's not that I couldn't, I had a very successful practice.
Yeah.
Very successful, very busy. I had excellent clients. But I'm going to say I was drawn back into family situations.
Okay.
My children grew up. They're adults now in their later 30s. I have grandchildren.
Right.
It was really, the change started happening when my father passed away, and then my mother became very, very ill, and had an accident right after my dad passed away. So you have to be careful when you have major changes. And she ended up really needing a lot of medical treatment and came back from it. But there were a lot of personal things calling me. And I always worked as a therapist, always part-time.
You did?
In community mental health.
Okay.
I always had,
Yeah.
even if it was like one day a week or per diem, we call it.
Sure.
I always kept my finger in that. And I have to say, I always liked being a pioneer, breaking boundaries in terms of medicine into a more holistic modality.
Right.
And a lot of what I did in community mental health was more a spiritual calling, kind of a service call. And I worked a lot and I studied a lot in the 90s with the folks that wrote PTSD and trauma diagnosis. And I started developing a heart for the urgency that we were living in, and really hearing stories again and again and again. And quite frankly, a lot of my bodywork clients were very well off. And they loved the work. I loved working with them. But I really have to say it was more like a missionary calling. That there's things going on culturally that are serious.
Yes.
And that really need attending to. So I started seeing that as really important. And the only place to really do that would be places that were already created in community mental health in very difficult areas. And it was also a very secure way to make an income.
Sure.
And I have to say, don't have any illusions that doing any kind of social work or psychology is good paying, because it is really bad pay.
And you deal with insurance companies sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole story. So it's very easy if you want to do trauma work. You've got to go into community mental health. You can't. It's very difficult to develop a private practice of paying clients, because a lot of times when people suffer trauma, their own incomes are really compromised. So, but it's an incredible opportunity. So, so I went back into same town that I started in terms of psychology, Haverhill, Massachusetts. And I started working in a large healthcare organization that also had hospital systems. And I went into substance abuse or use, as we call it now, and trauma, which usually go hand in hand. And usually the trauma happens before the substance use. So I found that very meaningful. And it's very difficult to kind of put your attention on two practices, if you will, if you're going to be immersed in a full-time job. So I kept it. I kept working with performers. That's
about the time I met you.
Yes, that's right. And that was my love.
Right.
But the community mental health, at that time in psychology, we were moving away from diagnoses with people that were really horrible labels. People who were traumatized look very similar to people with personality disorders. And I found it really important to discern the difference between someone who suffered trauma, who looked like, I want to say, someone with narcissistic or borderline personality disorders. I didn't like giving those diagnoses out like candy. You know? And the minute somebody would have a diagnosis like that, they were blacklisted for life in the medical system. So I just as I said, it's a very deep question.
Yeah.
But I really had a social conscience. And I have to say also, the environmentalist in me started seeing even those people who were sort of paying cash for body work, and I had a thriving practice,
Sure.
weren't necessarily very awake about the environment.
Right.
They had the resources, but they didn't have the consciousness always. Now that's a broad generalization.
Sure.
But we were kind of walking backwards socially. And psychology as well. That's when behavioral psychology started coming in, and my nickname for it is behavior self-therapy. So there started to be
self-therapy.
There started to be a lot of instructions for people how to behave themselves. And we went from longer therapy, which was more effective. For example, in my view, for example, people with substance issues would have a 30-day stay.
Yes.
Sandra Bullock's 28-day movie was the epitome of how good people would be cared for in the old days if they went in. And now they have a 2 to 3 day, we call them spin dry.
Yeah.
And so it's so what I started seeing was the erosion of really good mental health care, in my view.
Right.
I felt the people that were doing the best work were those that were working with trauma and finding ways to help people in a more emergent way. So that's sort of where I would say that I started. And I will sort of give you a very fast forward. I then became a manager for substance in this clinic I worked in. And then I started managing, sort of informing and educating other divisions of the large healthcare system I was in. I'm not going to name it for privacy reasons. But then I shifted gears, and I sort of went kicking and screaming because I knew how hard it was going to be to do this work. But I went and I was managing under a general manager, a methadone clinic.
Wow.
In the greater Boston area.
I think too, when I met you later, you were doing some of the work at the festival, and you said you have worked almost as a first responder.
Yes.
And weren't you there for some people that were really struggling after the Boston bombing?
Boston Marathon bombings, absolutely. I worked for, I guess it was about 9 years. I worked for a trauma community mental health group in Boston.
Wow.
Out of the Boston area. And in that was more a consultant. So I would have my full-time job and then my consultant job. I really got called to help in traumatic situations. And the Boston Marathon bombings were something that changed anybody that was touched by that, changed us for life. Sadly, as we are seeing, and of course, Columbine here. I'm remembering a musician who has a band who was called to Columbine.
We
we
wrote songs about that.
And you did as well. You know, that we have a very troubled, violent world. And so it really was a mission. It was sort of like, well, it's great to feel good and to have really meaningful body work. But wow, we have a war zone in pockets, or a tragedy zone in our culture that really needs addressing.
Right.
So I guess I became a little more serious about everything. And I don't think that anything that I've done stands alone. I think it was all a kind of rolling into what I did next and what I was called to. And it was a spiritual process to be called. And sometimes I went kicking and screaming and scared. I remember the Boston Marathon. I remember being down there right after the bombings. And one particular really difficult night where all the victims came out of the hospital and went back to the sites.
Really?
And there were two of us. Well, there were two of us as therapists, the Red Cross. There were ministers doing a prayer service. The mayor of Boston was there with roses for everybody to lay down where they were when it happened.
Oh, it gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, it was. That was absolutely the most fulfilling and the most empty experience I've ever had, because you could still see the burn marks on where the bombs went off, and the people had memories. And so it really was a very profound moment. And I never have felt so alone as when I got in my car and drove and left and was done that. It was dark, it was cold, and I was the last person on Boylston Street. I had to wait until everybody was gone and then go home. And I had to call my brother, who I adore, and say, I have to please just talk me home, because
it's okay.
I well up when I think about it. It was really a touch with, I'm going to say the word evil.
Well, yeah.
But I'm very, very happy I had that experience, and I had the opportunity to serve.
You gave that experience too. You gave.
Yeah, it was
your therapeutic gift.
It was so profound, and it was bigger than me personally. And I had a colleague that actually ran that program, who was there, and we really, really supported each other. So you never ever do this stuff without support, and you never do it without debriefing when you're done. And I was debriefed, and that was meaningful. So I worked with them as a consultant through a good part of COVID. I switched gears from working in community mental health into doing employee assistance in businesses, which I love. It's just the thing about working in psychology or social.
Still as a therapist, but for companies.
You can sort of have many different careers within one career.
Right.
And so that's sort of where I am now, and just find it very meaningful. And I, with COVID, had 3 municipalities that I worked with, never expecting that I would have the experiences I had in my career, in my later stage now of life, that I sort of thought I was going to go out and just sort of work and,
we've all been sidetracked.
Do my trainings, do my conferences, and then COVID, we all have a story. But I probably did 5 times the work that I usually do in a week.
I'm sure.
Because of 3 cities and all the municipal workers, the bless the Board of Health people. Who really, and bless the police and the fire and the mayors, the superintendents, the school teachers,
frontline, all of them.
You got it.
Frontline. We're all staying at home watching Netflix and learning to bake, and they're dealing with the COVID trauma and health struggles, and and so you're being a therapist to them.
Absolutely, and then I realized that it had really smacked me hard. And so I stopped doing all the outer consulting work and only stuck with the contracts that I have as a private consultant. So that brings us to today. But I think
today we're going to go to the botanical garden today and eat good food.
and also just to acknowledge, if anybody's listening, that we all have been altered. We all have been through a global trauma.
Yes.
And the trauma work that I have done, and the holistic part, the wellness piece is always emergent. It's always here. I look back on my early days of doing body work and all the years of, just the honor of working with you musicians who really give so much back, and just the ability to really learn about the music industry, which was a really wonderful opportunity. It's a unique thing. It's an experience a lot of people never.
I hope everybody's listening. Promoters out there, it's great to have real, not just find somebody that's not really deeply going to care for your musicians and your performance, but someone like Nickey that became my friend. And I'm so grateful for you to be on the podcast, and I wanted your story to be shared.
I know we're about finishing up, but can I tell you one thing?
Sure.
The greatest experience, and I think I alluded to it earlier, but I didn't sort of paint the whole picture.
Okay.
So we became a family. All of the bands, all of the performers that I know, actually I worked with the people that just the roadies who would set up and break down. And it was so amazing to see how this whole thing happens. And if you like a band, you have to love the whole group of people. It's not just it's not just who's front stage singing or jumping out in the crowd or doing the bells and whistles. There's a lot of people that are involved with pulling concerts together. And what would happen I really should say that I don't do music festivals anymore.
Yeah.
And I probably would if somebody asked me to do it now.
Sure.
But at that point in time, I was going through so many personal things, and it was a lot of work to literally set up the environment. And it was a lot of work, and I was a volunteer. If I sat and calculated what I would,
I knew that. That's why I brought you chocolate.
Yeah, what I would have actually been paid for the amount of hours. I just did it. I just did it, and the energy was really high, and the spiritual energy was really high. I left with a lot of payments in terms of the relationships and the spiritual experiences from pushing myself really hard. But I did not get compensated. Really, it was really a volunteer agreement. And some musicians like you would tip or bring something. Didn't expect it at all. It was those people who were sensitive. That was very special. But the other gift was people will come like you and every year say, "Let me catch you up. Here's my wife. These are my kids. This is what I'm doing now." And when the door would be closed, it was all confidential. So I never share stories. Never. I really operate on the ethics of good therapy. And so I earned trust from people, and I gave them my honor and my word and my practices as a therapist and a clinician. And you know, people can tell when you break trust. And so and so I always considered the fact that I was still respected in the work that I did, and people would want part of their contract to say, "Could I please have a bodywork session with Nickey?" Or or "Is she backstage?" Or "Can you be sure to drive?" I had one band that was at Far Stage one year, and they're like, "Could you bring us to blah, blah, blah."
We need to do this.
That was all negotiated. But what was the most fun was to see the progress, and then to hear how it impacted people. And it wasn't like I could do a whole long session, because I might have 8 people in a band plus their road manager plus their whatever.
Ska band.
So I just wanted to be sure to acknowledge that it's not just show up with magic hands, that there's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of really powerful energy in these festivals. So it's my honor to work with you and know all of you in 5 Iron, all of them. Obviously I know and have worked with your gang, and hope I get the chance sometime to do that again. But if not, I hope
our friendship will stay.
Oh, absolutely.
We're good, girl.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of fun.
I hope that some of what I shared, which is really from my heart, you know, and your heart, we've shared this together, and your massage was pretty awesome. Please never stop that. But you know, that whole kind of opportunity for us to come together as community and really honor and praise the grace that totally surrounds us.
Amen.
Amen. Yes.
Thank you.